How lenses can help you take better photos. Hi, and a very warm welcome to episode 190 no less of the Photography Explained podcast. I'm your host Rick, and in each episode I will try to explain one photographic thing to you in plain English in less than 27 minutes-ish without the irrelevant details. I'm a professionally qualified photographer based in England with a lifetime of photographic experience, which I share with you in my podcast. Lenses on cameras give photographers options. To understand how lenses can help you take better photos, you need to know what you want to photograph, how you want to take these photos, and what you want your photos to look like. Now, once you know these things, you can find the lenses that work for you. Only you can do this, but once you know what you want to do, you can look into the wonderful world of lenses. How utterly splendid! Lenses are tools that photographers use to take the photos they need. In this episode, I'm going to tell you how I ended up with the lenses that I've got, which seems to make sense. More on that in a bit. So that was the answery bit. Here is the talky bit. Now, I want to start off just covering a few general things, starting with the point from the answery bit. Where do you start? Well, when you're choosing a lens for a camera, and that applies to a camera as well, but we're not going into that here, the starting point is always to decide what you want to photograph. And if you're not sure, a general purpose lens is a great place to start. If you want to photograph the details in flowers, a macro lens is for you. If you want to photograph motorsport, a telephoto lens is a must. Now, I will qualify those statements later on, okay? But the point here is, start with what you want to take photos of. Now, I'm going to take a massive leap here. I'm going to assume that you, dear listener, will be aligned with me to a degree, and that you'll be thinking of zoom lenses, which are all I use these days. I covered this in the last episode, but as a quick reminder, a zoom lens has a variable focal length, such as a 24 to 105mm lens. A prime lens, a non-zoom lens if you like, it's got a fixed focal length, such as a 50mm lens. Okay, so I used to have some fixed lenses. I've always used zoom lenses. Well, I've always used zoom lenses with my digital photography, and that's all I have now. So I'm going to work on the basis that you're in the same boat as me. But before I do that, there's some things I need to pick up, which I covered in the last episode, but they are relevant to what I'm going to talk about shortly. The first one's focal lengths. As a reminder, a 50mm focal length on a full-frame camera, it gives a similar field of view to that which we see with our own eyes. A lens with a focal length of less than 50mm, as in a smaller number than 50, that gives a wider field of view and is called a wide-angle lens. Makes sense, doesn't it? A lens with a focal length larger than 50mm, as in a larger number, that has a narrower field of view. And that lens is unhelpfully called a telephoto lens. I know, wide angle makes sense, telephoto, not as much. A 50mm focal length on a full frame camera, it gives a horizontal field of view of about 40 degrees. Now, popular focal lengths for lenses, they're within the, 24 to 200mm range. A 24mm focal length lens is a wide angle lens, and that gives a field of view of around 73 degrees. A lens with a 200mm focal length is a telephoto lens, and you'll get a field of view of around 10 degrees. So 50mm lens, 40 degree field of view, 24mm lens, 73 degree field of view, and a 200mm focal length, about 10 degrees. Now I say about because there's decimal points, but I'm not going into that detail here. I'm trying to just explain the differences. Now, you can get lenses with smaller focal lengths than 24mm, which are even wider. And you can get lenses with larger focal lengths than 200mm, which give you even narrower fields of view. I could talk about focal lengths forever, but I've got a different plan, which I'll get onto. Next thing I want to just pick up quickly, crop factor. I'm sorry, I have to mention crop factor. I really am sorry. If I didn't have to do this, I'd be happy, you'd be happy. But I have to. 50mm on a full frame camera is a standard lens. To get the same field of view, as in the same view as a 50mm lens on a full frame camera, with a crop sensor camera, you need a focal length of 31 to 33-ish millimeters. And with a micro four thirds camera, a 25mm focal length gives you the same field of view as a 50mm lens on a full frame camera. I know. 24mm on a crop sensor camera, it gives you 36mm-ish. But to get the same field of view as a full frame 24mm lens, you need a 16mm-ish focal length on a crop sensor camera. And that's not great. I mean, it is what it is, but when you look at the telephoto end of things, you've got the crop factor which you multiply by the focal length to give you the effective focal length. So 200mm focal length on a crop sensor camera, that gives you 300 to 320mm, which to some is a good thing. And even better, with a micro four thirds camera, a 200mm focal length gives you an effective focal length of 400mm, and that is quite significant. And if you're using telephoto lenses a lot, crop sensor cameras, and indeed micro four thirds cameras, they should be a consideration for you. Right, maximum aperture. The maximum aperture is the size of the opening in the lens. The smaller the number, the larger the maximum aperture, and the more light that gets through to the camera sensor. And the bigger, heavier, more expensive, and generally bulky the lens probably is. Okay, that's the fundamentals. Now, I've been thinking about how I'm going to explain this. How am I going to explain to you how lenses can help you to take better photos? So rather than trying to go through all of these variables, I'm going to give you a very, very practical example. And that example, it's me. Well, what's not to love, eh? So what do I do? Well, I use a full frame Canon 6D with a Canon 17 to 40mm f4L lens. Now that's a full frame camera with a professional quality lens. Sounds expensive, doesn't it? You can buy a used Canon 6D for, well, hopefully less than you might think. So what I've done is I've had a quick look on the internet and I found loads of Canon 6Ds in a good condition, as in they're used, but they're in a good condition. Everything works. They might have some cosmetic marks, but do we care about that? I don't anyway. And you can get one for about 400 quid or $400 or I guess 400 euros. Not done the conversions recently. And the lens, the 17 to 40mm lens, 750 quid, $750, 750 euros. I'm going to stop doing that because that's just me blatantly trying to appeal to everybody, isn't it? I'm going to stick to pounds. Hope nobody's offended by that. So 750 quid for a brand new Canon lens, a professional standard lens. It's part of the L series lens. L stands for luxury, would you believe? Yes, it does. Now, I know £750 is a lot of money. I know that. I'm not saying it's not. And I know that £400 for a camera body is a lot of money. But it's a lot less than buying the brand new equivalent. So, yes, £1,150 for the two. I know it's a lot of money. But if you're serious about your photography, you're going to have to invest in some decent gear at some point. Not saying now, but at some point you'll need to, okay? Now, I've also got a Canon 24 to 105mm lens and a Canon 70 to 200mm lens, and I'll come back to these. I've only got 3 lenses for my Canon system. That's it. I use the 17 to 40mm lens for, I don't know, 95% of my photos, and I probably take 80 to 90% of these photos using the 17mm focal length. So much so that I sometimes gaffer tape the zoom ring so that it stays at 17mm, so I get the best value out of the lens, because that's the bit that I need, want and value and like. So 17mm for me. I could use a 17mm prime lens, couldn't I, really? No, 17mm works for me. I know what I'm doing, and I know that this focal length works for me and what I'm taking photographs of. And I am a great example of knowing what you're photographing and what you need to do to help you to do this. Knowing which lenses can help you, or in this case me, take the photos I need to. Now, 17mm focal length, it gives me a 93-degree horizontal field of view. That is wide. I guess it's into the ultra-wide range. It's wide enough to capture interior spaces without exaggerating them, which is very important to me. If I go any wider than 17mm, there's a risk of me making spaces look bigger than they are. But if I use a focal length of more than 17mm, I risk not fitting an interior space into a single photo. So 17mm works for me and for what I do. On a shoot, I'll leave the other lenses in the car. I take my camera on the tripod with a 17 to 40mm lens on it and a few bits in my backpack. I'll leave the rest in the car. They're there if I need them, but I probably won't. Let's remember, I take photos of buildings, that's interiors and exteriors, and the 17 to 40 lens gives me what I need. It works for me. The lens has got a maximum aperture of f4. Lenses with larger maximum apertures let more light in, which allows you to use faster shutter speeds, and it allows you to take photos in lower light handheld. Okay, so the f4 maximum aperture, I need to just explain some things on this one. Canon doesn't make an f2.8 version of a lens, so I need to look at the closest lens to this, which is the 16 to 35mm lens. It's a definite contender for me. If I break the 17 to 40 lens and I'm looking to replace it, I might go to the 16 to 35 lens. And in the Canon system, you've got an f2.8 maximum aperture and an f4 version. Right, so what's the difference? Well, they're both L series lenses. They're both professional quality lenses. The f2.8 version, it costs about £1,150. The Mark II version is only 750 quid, which is looking good. And the f4 version, it costs around £860. Now, that's not too bad for professional quality lenses. So what about the weight? This is the other thing we need to know about, isn't it? The 2.8 lens weighs 790 grams. The f4 version, 620 grams. Now, that's not a huge difference, granted, but you get the point. I didn't do the sizes here, but it's smaller. The f4 lens is smaller than the f2.8. If you look at other lenses, such as the 28 to 70 f2.8 against the f4 version, and other lenses, you'll see that things get bigger. And on telephoto lenses, things are already bigger, so you just compound that by making them even bigger. To be honest with you, that's not giving me the demonstration of the difference that I was hoping for. It's not a lot, but I do know people who struggle with the weight of photography gear, so it is a serious consideration. It really is. But the point for me is this. I don't need a lens with a larger maximum aperture. I take my photos from a camera on a tripod, and I'm photographing buildings and they're not moving, so f4 is fine for me. I do not need f2.8. Do not buy a more expensive lens with a larger maximum aperture if you don't need it, unless you want to, of course. And yeah, I am looking at the 16 to 35mm lens and thinking about how nice it would be. I've had a look at it and gone, oh, that's not bad. Yeah, I need to stop it. This can be a problem. It's been a problem to me in the past, as you'll find out. I call it shiny newness syndrome. Other people call it GAS, which is gear acquisition syndrome. Yes, really. Okay, I also like taking landscape photos. For my landscape photos, I like to use my Canon 17 to 40mm lens. See, I like wide-angle photos, but when I'm photographing buildings, I don't want to go too wide, as things can begin to look unnatural. But with landscape photography, you can go much wider indeed. And this is where I would dearly love more gear acquisition syndrome here. The Canon 11 to 24mm lens. 11mm focal length. It gives you an impressive, wait for this one, this is good, 117-degree field of view. And I could really use that on my landscape photography. But I'd never use 11mm for photos of buildings. If I used 11mm, I'd be making interior spaces look much larger. Larger. I need to tell you now that it's 11:40 in the morning and I'm thinking of lager already. Quite a concern, isn't it? No, if I use the 11mm focal length photographing interiors, They'd be too big. They'd look too big. They'd look artificial. They wouldn't be realistic. Now, for some people, that won't be a problem, but for me, it's an absolute no. I take photographs of buildings for architects, so I need to replicate the spaces accurately, and the same applies to real estate photography. We've all seen those photos where a tiny room looks massive. That's no use to anybody. If I was photographing buildings for fun, that'd be fine, but I'm not. And this is the point. You use the lenses that work for what you're doing. Going back to the landscape photography, I take my landscape photos with my camera on a tripod, so maximum aperture lens doesn't really interest me. And just so we're clear, I enjoy taking photographs with my camera on a tripod. I prefer taking photographs with my camera on a tripod than handheld. And I prefer taking photos handheld with my camera than I do taking photos with my phone. Just saying. Another thing on landscape photography, sorry, this isn't in my script. This has just popped into my head now. With landscape photography, you can be more dramatic. You can get funkier angles. And when you go wide, like 11mm, that's ultra wide, you can get really close to things. You can get completely different compositions, different results from photos. It's a lot more creative. Not that what I do isn't creative, but what I do is a bit more functional. Landscape photography, where you got more license, you can use these focal lengths and they can really transform photos. As to the other lenses I have, I bought the Canon 6D with a 24 to 105mm lens. Now, this is a great general lens. It's a really great general lens. It's a great lens to start with too. 24mm, it's a really good wide-angle focal length. 105mm, it's a mild telephoto length, granted, but it's still telephoto. But it's the range that's good. Now, I used this when I was starting out with full-frame cameras. I had to correct that because I forgot about the bit before the Canon 5D. This is how I started off with a full-frame camera, and I found I was taking more photos with the 24mm end of things, partly because of what I was photographing, but partly because of the results I was getting. And that led me naturally to the 17 to 40mm lens. Now, on rare occasions when I'm walking around a place with my Canon 6D, more on why not in a minute, I'll use the 24 to 105mm lens. And there's my third lens, which is the 70 to 200 f4L IS lens. It's another great lens. It really is a great lens, and it's not that expensive. It's a brilliant telephoto lens. I used to use it quite a lot, but I can't remember when I last used it. I'll use it every now and then if I want to get a detail of something, but it's always there for me if I need it. But I use it much less than I used to because of what I'm taking photos of these days. And that's my lenses. That's it. I've got 3 lenses. I use one of them 95% of the time, possibly more. So when you're faced with this massive range of lenses, just think about what's going to work for you. And it helps you narrow things down massively. One lens, 95% of my photos. How good is that? So that's it. 3 lenses with my Canon system. I've got rid of all the other lenses. This is the lenses that I've had, and I'm sure I've forgotten some here. An 8 to 15mm fisheye zoom lens. Absolutely bonkers lens. Great fun. I loved it. 8mm was circular fisheye. 15mm was rectangular fisheye. I can't find a single use for a circular fisheye photo, even though I took quite a few. But the 15mm bit, I absolutely loved it. Take photographs, your feet are in it. Go into a forest, point up at the sky, boom, fantastic photos. But I don't need one, so I sold it, much as I loved it. I also had a 100mm macro lens. Can't remember the maximum aperture, doesn't matter, long time ago. See, I read something about macro lenses and I bought one. And I used it half a dozen times and that was that. Not really interested in macro photography. Why did I buy it? Because I'm stupid, that's why. Then I had a 100 to 400mm lens. Bit of a monster lens, which I absolutely loved, and I used it a lot, but it got to the point where I didn't use it for, I don't know, a couple of years, so I sold it. I've got a 12-month rule, which is if I don't use something in 12 months, get rid of it because I don't need it. Harsh, but it's good. I hated selling it. This This is another thing that's come back to me. I hated selling it. I didn't want to part with it. I really didn't. But I haven't really thought about it until now. So that's fine because I sold it in 19? In 2019, I think. Right, the other lens, a 20... Oh, hang on a minute. I've missed one here. A 40mm... I missed two lenses there. How silly of me. A 40mm Pancake lens. I bought this because I thought I needed it. And I didn't. More on Pancakes in a minute. 50mm f1.8 lens. Again, I bought this because I've read something somewhere saying everybody should have a 50mm lens. And another term I hate is nifty 50. Where did that come from? Why? No, I don't need one. I bought it. I didn't need it. I sold it. More money wasted. 100mm macro lens. Yep, covered that. 100 to 400, covered that. 24mm tilt shift lens. To be a real architectural photographer, you must use a tilt shift lens, right? Careful how you say that, Rick. Wrong. Not for me. I didn't like it. A tilt shift lens. They're amazing things. You can correct verticals in camera. Yes, of course you should be doing that. But it was manual focus. I'm 57 years old. What chance have I got of focusing on a building manually with my eyes? Pretty much zero. That's what. So it didn't work for me. I can get round the converging verticals because I know what I'm doing. I can get round all that stuff in the way I take photos and what I do to them afterwards. Of course, getting things right in camera should always be encouraged. So me and a manual focus lens, it's not happening. They're not going to get any better either, are they? No, they're not. Right, I'm going to... My script says I apologise for repeating the point. Now, I'm not going to apologise for repeating the point. Get what you want. Get what you need. Don't get what people tell you have to have. It has to come from you. Okay, I also have an Olympus EM5 Mark II camera, which is a Micro Four Thirds camera, which I use for travel photography. Now, my go-to lens is the 12 to 42mm Pancake lens. There you go, Pancake lens that I actually need and use. Now, 12 to 42mm equates to 24 to 80mm on a full-frame camera. So it's another great everyday focal length range. Not too dissimilar from my 24 to 105, is it? Funny that. Now, I love this lens because it's super compact. I can fit this camera and lens combo in a pocket. A coat pocket, I genuinely can. And I have managed to fit it in a trouser pocket once, but it looked a bit strange. But it's the smallest camera and lens combo I've ever had, and I absolutely love it. Now, for my Olympus system, I've also got a 12 to 40mm lens, which is an f2.8. It's a big lump which sticks on the front of the small camera, 24 to 80 full frame equivalent, and that's got an f2.8 maximum aperture. Now, that's a professional lens as well, but not expensive as the Canon one. Now, you have to remember that Micro Four Thirds lenses are cheaper than full frame lenses in general terms. Now, as lovely as this 12 to 40 f2.8 lens is, an f4 version would be fine for me. And I contacted Olympus about this some time ago and asked them the question, and they went, yeah, we're working on that. And do you know what? They've introduced a load of f4 maximum aperture lenses because there was a bit of a mismatch between a big f2.8 lump on a Micro Four Thirds camera. Well, it's a mismatch for me anyway. So I am planning on getting one of the f4 lenses. And the one I want is the 8 to 25mm Pro lens, which is 16 to 50mm, which ties back to my 16 to 35. So you can see where I'm going with this. I've got very specific needs, and my two camera systems, whilst they are completely different, they end up being pretty much the same, don't they? Yeah, if I got the 8 to 25 Pro lens with the 16 to 50 focal length, I'd be a very happy chappy. And I can add to that the third lens in the Olympus system. Yes, I've got 3 lenses for my Canon system, and I've got 3 lenses for my Olympus system, and no more. It's funny, isn't it? So the third lens is a 40 to 150mm lens, which gives me a splendid effective focal length of 80 to 300mm. 300mm on a lens that small and that cheap is pretty amazing. And the quality of these little lenses is better than you'd expect. It really is. 300mm gives a horizontal field of view of about 7 degrees. So with my Olympus system, my 3 lenses, they go from 24mm to 300mm in real terms, which is all I need for my travel photography. And these lenses, and of course the camera body, they're smaller and lighter than my Canon stuff, so I'm happy to travel with this gear. It gets a bit awkward actually packing my camera gear these days into my backpack because they're so small and there's so little of them. I have to pack things around them just to make sure they don't rattle around in my bag. That's a problem I wasn't expecting. It's too small. There's not enough gear. And it means that my backpack, it's only a 20-litre backpack, the top half of it I can use for all that stuff you buy at the airport that you never thought that you wanted or needed or would ever eat. So, yeah, a win-win. So these 3 lenses, they help me to get the photos I need. I take day-to-day stuff with the Pancake lens, but when I'm photographing a sunrise, I'll use the Pro lens, which is a higher quality lens. Now, can I tell the difference in quality between the 2 lenses? Not really. I've never really thought about it or studied it or looked at a photo taken with the Pancake lens and gone, wow, that's not sharp. I haven't noticed. And that's another important thing to bear in mind. People might tell you that a lens is of a higher quality, but can you really tell? Does it really matter? Questions you need to ask yourself. Right, that's what I do. And that's my thoughts on how I decided which lenses I needed and what I ended up with. So the talky bit, well, not a lot to say really, is there? Actually, there is. It's up to you what lenses you need. I can't tell you what lenses you need. I can't tell every listener what lenses each of you needs in one podcast episode, or ever come to that. But of course, if you've got any specific questions, just get in touch with me and I'll happily answer them. It'd be lovely to hear from you. Now, there are so many variables here, and here are some examples. I'm just going to give you some things that you can think about. You don't have to only use a wide-angle lens for landscape photography. You can get great landscape photos with a telephoto lens. Of course you can. They're just different. But don't take headshots of people with a wide-angle lens. You won't get flattering results and people won't like you for doing it. No, for portrait photography, use a focal length of around 85mm to get the best results. And when I say portrait photography, if you're photographing people, that's an optimum focal length. So if you've got a 24-105 zoom, you've got 85mm, 85-90, don't worry too much about the preciseness of the number. It's that kind of focal length. And on a Micro Four Thirds camera, the 12-42, takes you straight up to 84mm, which is pretty much bang on. You'll get better photos. People will thank you. And another example, don't photograph motorsports with a wide-angle lens unless you're close. And then you can get some great effects. But for general photos of fast-moving cars on a track from the side, you need a telephoto lens, and you'll need one with a large maximum aperture to give you a faster shutter speed without raising the ISO excessively. That's where a lens with a larger maximum aperture helps you. Doesn't help me, but it will help someone photographing, say, F1. But if you're in the pit lane, if you're lucky enough to be in the pit lane and you're stood right next to an F1 car, you will get some amazing photos of that car with a wide-angle lens. And you won't get a decent photo with a telephoto lens if you're right next to it. So you can use a wide-angle lens for motorsport, and you can use a telephoto lens for landscape photography. But for flattering photos of people, use the right focal length. For sports photography, you'll probably need a telephoto lens with a large maximum aperture. For architectural photography, you're going to need a wide-angle lens, but you don't need a large maximum aperture. And this is part of the challenge. Different lenses give us different things. Now, have you ever wondered why professional photographers at major sports events have got these cameras with massive lenses? Well, there's a reason someone spent $10,000 on a lens. Lens choice should always come back to need, and that photographer will have spent $10,000 for a reason. They won't have done it lightly, just gone, oh, fancy that big lens, 10 grand later, haha. No, they'd have bought it for a reason. It will be earning them money. It will be paying them back. And the longer you have these lenses, the more payback you get. Some some more great examples. If you're photographing lions in the jungle, a wide-angle lens will not help you, will it? No, it won't. No, wildlife photography, it has specific needs, including life-saving ones. No, it depends entirely on what you're photographing, how you're photographing it, and what you're trying to get out of the photo. And what I do will probably be a different type of photography to what you do. So if you only take one thing out of this episode, make it this. Work out what you want to take photographs of before you buy a lens. And if you're unsure, get a general purpose lens as I did, the Canon 24-105mm lens, which was the lens I got with my first full frame camera. Now I'm saying first full frame camera because I forgot the time before the full frame camera when I started out, because I started with a crop sensor camera with the 18-55mm kit lens. It's a great starting point for lots of people. 18-55mm, it gives you an effective focal length of about 28-88mm, and that's wide angle to telephoto. That's where I and many other photographers, many other photographers started. So if all you can afford is an 18-55mm kit lens, that's fine. Use it. The important thing is that you use the lens and you learn what the different focal lengths do, and you learn what works for you, what you like, the effects you like. There is no shame in having an 18-55mm kit lens. Most of us started off with that lens, so it's not a problem. The problem is if someone tells you it's a problem. And if someone tells you it's a problem, send them to me and I'll sort them out for you. Right, I'm done there. I had loads of other stuff in my script, but that was pretty much repeating what I said in the last episode. And no one wants that, do they? No, they don't, Rick. Now, I quickly covered depth of field in the last episode, but that's one I'm going to pick up in a future episode all of its own. But I still call it depth of sharpness. Just saying. Right, I'm done here. No, sorry. The bit I did genuinely forget. Money. How much money do you have to spend on a lens? They're all fine talking about how lenses can help you take better photos, but you've got to pay for them. They cost money. And £300 for a lens, it's a lot of money. If you buy a lens for £300, that's a significant investment. I don't care who you are, £300 is a lot of money. So you need to know what you're doing. But remember this, when you buy a lens, you're making a long-term investment. A lens will not get superseded in a year like a camera will. I've had my lenses for over 10 years and they work perfectly. They've never let me down. That's in part because they're professional quality lenses, and that's a big part. But the other part is because I look after them. I look after them so carefully. I cherish my lenses, and I'm going to cover that in the next episode because that's good stuff. Right, what if I use a phone to take photos? Get a camera. You can take better photos with a camera than you can with a phone. That's all I want to say here. Move on. What do I do? I've told you that, haven't I? I found my way over many years. So what I've told you here will hopefully help you, and it'll save you time and also money as you go along your photographic journey. Learn from my mistakes. Listen to what I've said and apply that. All I'm saying is decide what you want to take photos of and find the right lens that works for you. And like I say, if you've got specific questions, if you're not sure, just get in touch and I'll answer you. Not a problem. It would be a pleasure. Some thoughts from the last episode. Well, this is the thoughts from the last episode, really, isn't it? This is the follow-up episode. But there is one thing I want to say, and that's this. The beauty of modern cameras, whether DSLR or mirrorless cameras, is that you can see what you're taking a photo of through the viewfinder or LCD screen. And that's using the lens that you've got. So when you've got your lens, you can see what it's doing, you can see what it's capturing, and that's a wonderful thing. And it means that if you want to, you can forget the numbers. You could just put the numbers to one side and look through your viewfinder, see what your lens is doing, see what you're capturing. It's great, isn't it? And you can check a photo after you've taken it to see if what you've got's rubbish or not. And if it's rubbish, get rid of it. Take another one. What's not to love? But you still need to think before you take every photo. You do. You just do. Okay, next episode, how to look after lenses. I really want to cover this. My script says it might be a quick episode, but I've said that before, haven't I? It never has been. So now I'm going to tell you how I look after my lenses, which have served me faithfully for many, many years. Yep, I'm happy with that idea, so that's what I'm going to do. No, I haven't written it yet. That's not in the script. I was making some of that up as I was talking. Ask me a question. If you got a question you'd like me to answer, be it a general question about photography, a question about this episode and how lenses can help you take better photos, or anything else, email me, sales@rickmcevoyphotography.co.uk, or visit the podcast website, photographyexplainedpodcast.com/start. Or text me from the podcast feed. Now, if you text me, I can't reply, but I will mention you in a future episode, okay? And if you just want to say hi, say hi. It's always lovely to hear from listeners. Always lovely. Okay, I'm done. This episode was brought to you by a blank in the script because I didn't know what I was going to be eating and when I was going to be recording this. But it turns out this is a morning recording. So this episode was brought to you by a sausage sandwich with microwave sausages left over from last night's tea on a protein bagel. Still on the health thing, going well. No crisps, but I have brown sauce on it, which is very nice. Which I consume before I settle down in my homemade acoustically cushioned recording emporium. I've been Rick McEvoy. Thanks again very much for listening to my small but perfectly formed podcast, it says here, and for giving me 27-ish minutes of your valuable time. Now, after I've edited out the mistakes and the other bad stuff, this episode's looking like being, I don't know, more than 30 minutes long, possibly. And I was worried this was going to be a short episode. One day it will. One day, Rick. Right, I'm going. Thanks for listening. Take care. Stay safe. Cheers from me, Rick.